Welcome to Primary Care Today on ReachMD. I'm your host, Dr. Brian McDonough, and with me today is Dr. Kamar Adeleke. We're going to be talking about Ebola, practice of medicine in Africa, the differences between Africa here and the United States, a lot of issues that right now are in the news, and Dr. Adeleke is kind enough to have joined me. I really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
My first question for you, as a physician, and I'll set it up for the audience. Dr. Adeleke actually practices in Wilmington, Delaware. He also practices in Nigeria. He teaches and helps teach in a residency program in Wilmington. He also teaches in a medical school in Nigeria and has a major role in a hospital in Nigeria, as a matter of fact. But you kind of are a lot more familiar about Ebola than many of us because you clearly have been seeing what's been happening in Africa. Could you describe what you know, care in Africa, and why maybe it was more likely to have begun spreading there a little more quicker than it certainly would in the United States?
Well, again, thank you, Brian, for having me on your show. I think Ebola virus, as you and I probably know, is not something new. It's a virus that have been probably first detected, I believe, in 1976, so almost about 40 years ago. And it has been found in different parts of the world, notably in West Africa, but also, has been shown, some strain have been shown to be from China and also, from Philippines. So, but I think the problem with Ebola virus is that, when it comes and people get in contact with it and it starts spreading, the Ebola virus, spread, as you know, through direct contact either because of broken skin, someone who had a very high level of infection and that broken skin, or even mucous membrane, and also of course from the body fluid, blood, urine, saliva, stool, vomit, and of course people from the soil of clothing or bed sheets. So there's so many ways you can get it, but the bottom line about it is that Ebola virus only become contagious when the habitant, in other words, the infected patient is really sick, because that is when the viral load is concentrated in the body fluid. What we do know, though, is that there's no report of any airborne of Ebola virus being transmitted. And I think the problem with the spread that we are seeing in West Africa is because of lack of basic hygienic care, and precaution that we would have taken care of. I mean, we practice very commonly in the Western world. And then the fact that there is no any available facility to take care of these people when they are critically ill. And I think that is the reason why the mortality for that is almost approaching about 90% in the Western, in the third world countries.
Now, as you would expect here in the United States, when there were cases that crept into the United States, more or less, we became more aware of it, it gained a great deal of attention. But as you say, this is not something new. It's something that has been a problem in Africa. But I was talking with you a little earlier prior to this interview, and one of the things you were talking about, though, was up until now, it's been relatively controlled. It hasn't spread at a dramatic rate. What's your thoughts about that? And obviously, anytime anyone gets this and suffers from Ebola, it's not a small thing, but it hasn't spread through a major city of 40 million people, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, and we have been quite very lucky because of that. I mean, if you look at majority of the countries that have been, epidemic in Ebola virus, they are like Sierra Leone, Liberia. I mean, the population of Liberia and Sierra Leone is probably about 44 million, each, or to 6 million. And, they tend to really be localized in the rural area, not in the big city. And I believe that is probably because of, we know the original or the originator of the Ebola virus, which a lot of people believe has probably come, from the wild, game animals, the fruit bats, chimpanzee, and antelope. Now, people who tend to really hunt these animals are in the rural area, like the antelope, which is a big thing for us in Africa. So, and I think what happened is the Ebola virus, when it infects, particularly, if there are almost about 5 different species, I believe. Those species that are found in Africa have been very, virulent. Whereas the one that is found in China, and the Philippines, I think it's called resting Ebola virus. They have been shown to infect human beings, but I don't think there have been any human beings that have died from it. So there are different species of Ebola virus. But I think the key thing about those people is that when you get infected, people will get sick and they will die. They will die off. Now, the people who survive, particularly male who survive, it has been shown that even the Ebola virus can still be detected in the semen. So when they go and have sex with someone else, then that person, if they have a very low immunity, and they can easily transmit to that person. But I think when these games come back, another animals or the chimpanzee or whatever antelope, another one get infected, it can start the cycle again. Even though the original people that have died are gone, but when this animal get infected and that animal get in contact, with human beings, then the cycle continues. And I think that's the reason why Ebola virus has been around for so long, because when it comes in, it just wipe out everybody. 90% mortality, and that's it. Those who survive, then they survive.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Primary Care Today on ReachMD. I'm your host, Dr. Brian McDonough. I'm speaking today with Dr. Kamar Adeleke, and Dr. Adeleke is a person who is a cardiologist, obviously practices medicine at the highest level, and at the same time, he practices here in the United States and at the highest level in Africa as well. Tell me a little bit about, we hear a lot of talk about the culture of medicine in Africa, and that perhaps a lot of patients don't necessarily come in until it's too late for help, that they may not be as trusting of the medical community. Is that widespread? Is that just in Western Africa? What's your sense?
I think it's actually take, for example, Ebola virus. One of the things that I think the experts are very afraid of. Now, people in Africa, they know, number one, that there's no cure for Ebola virus. They know that there's no vaccination, for Ebola virus. So therefore, when they go, to hospital, they know that they're going to be quarantined, and they may not even be able to see their loved one. So a lot of Africans still practice the ritual, so-called, the African medicine. So whereby, they take them into the house and they start praying for them. Well, unfortunately, these people get more, infectious, and then, they can contribute, to the transmission. So a lot of the African people still believe in holistic medicine. They don't believe in the so-called, English medicine, which is what you and I practice. And that is a big thing. There's still no trust, that the Western medicine can really, cure a lot of the diseases that we have. And which is why some of the common diseases that have been eradicated, like polio, for example, now, in the northern part of Nigeria, being shown that people don't believe in the vaccine. In fact, they think some of them think the vaccine is purposely being used to infect people. So, there's still not good trust, between, our people and the Western medicine, and that is a problem.
What other barriers are there to treatment for something like Ebola? Because clearly this is a dramatic case. This is different than somebody with a strep throat or an ear infection. This is life and death. What are some of the other barriers as you see it right now in Africa?
Well, the problem, as you know, Ebola virus, every time I think about it, it actually, it just reminds me of the HIV. If you remember, the time that you and I are going through training, when the HIV, we thought, oh, no, I don't want to, touch these people. I don't want to come in contact with them. Some of the doctors, even in Africa, they still have that kind of, stigma with Ebola virus, which is very true. And secondly is that they don't know which patient we can trust. When you and I know now that Ebola virus only cause trouble or only get transmitted when you have a high viral load, and you have viral load when you are really sick. So therefore, that is number one. Number two is that, when Ebola virus patients die, they die of critical illness. They are in shock, they are bleeding, they are dehydrated, and of course, there is no antibiotics. So what you need to do is intensive care, treatment, which they do not have. I don't think of any other, even beside South Africa, probably some of the hospitals, like our hospital in Nigeria now, and in Ghana. I don't think there's any hospital in Africa that really have a high intensive care that can, get these people through. And I think that is the key. People that come to the United States, I'm sure they're going to survive it. Why? Because we have sophisticated intensive care, treatment in this country. That is lacking in Africa. So the most important thing in Africa right now is avoidance. Is to really make sure that we find a way to isolate those people who are infected so that they do not go in contact, with other people. The other thing in Africa is that when people die, we have the habit of really touching and hugging them. And in fact, if you look at those, majority of people who have died, are the family who are touching and hugging, the dead body, whereby, the virus is still quite very, voluminous.
So that's a lot of things culturally and also from a standpoint of not necessarily having all the money and availability of treatment. What about people traveling? I mean, you travel back and forth from Africa, and you do it on a relatively regular basis. Have you noticed any changes, any concerns, any difference in security, anything from your standpoint?
Well, I think one of the things that we're finding out now is people are becoming more hygienic. People are very careful. They're closely monitor. Because when I fly to Nigeria, I go on Delta Airline. Delta Airline, they use the 777 or 767, which may have over 200 passengers. And they are really crowded. So people are quite very careful now. When they are touching people, when they are, even shaking their hands. So, but again, as I said, people really don't get infected. They don't get contagious until they are really, really sick. And when they are sick is when they start having fever, vomiting, nausea, bleeding. That is when they become contagious. So people, the awareness is there now, which is very good. And people now knowing that, if you have any fever, you quickly go to the hospital. In fact, I think the new recommendation now is that when you travel into the endemic area or you're just coming from the endemic area like this, you should really check your temperature twice a day for the next 3 weeks, which goes with the incubation period. And as soon as you have fever, okay, then it's time to quickly be checked out for Ebola virus. So we can't just be doing the screening for, people that don't have fever, but that's the guideline. Then once you get checked out and you're Ebola virus positive, then you need to be admitted right away. So people are really getting a lot of education now. But it had not affected the traveling. At least I just came back about, 4 days ago, 5 days ago. It hadn't really affected the major countries like Nigeria. I'm afraid, though. I'm afraid because Nigeria is a big country. I mean, so far now, if you remember the guy that got infected, that died,
right?
That is Mr. Patrick Sawyer. Well, 5 people now have been identified in Nigeria as of today. The nurse that took care of Mr. Sawyer died.
Mm-hmm.
So now, beside Mr. Sawyer, the nurse have died, and 5 other people have been identified, and they've been quarantined. So we are hoping and praying that those is going to be, that is it, because if it happens to Nigeria, Africa is in trouble.
Because it'll spread through in a big city much quicker, I'm sure.
Yeah, 21 million people, 22 million people in Lagos alone. That is really huge.
One last question, because we're almost out of time. What about traveling back and forth with the world, with international travel? We're seeing a lot more things coming from our part or other parts of the world because people travel so much. You travel a lot. Do you ever get frightened?
Not really. The traveling is actually not bad. The what you get out of, taking care of these people in Africa is just incredible. Our program is so incredible. Taking care of children, the female, the adult, people that don't even have anything, that don't have any hope. I'm actually hoping one of these days you will make it there.
Tell me a little bit about where you're working and what you're doing, because I think our physician audience would be interested.
Well, currently now we are, in Ibadan. Ibadan is about 68 miles to Lagos. We started the open heart surgery program there. We did the first, cardiac catheterization angioplasty. We do a lot of congenital heart defect. We have done about 26 open heart surgeries. That includes tetralogy of Fallot, a lot of valvular heart disease, and also we are finding out that there are so many coronary artery disease people that are very young having, massive heart attack. So it's quite very. We are now working in Lagos, Ibadan, and then also we are studying in Abuja, which is the capital city of Nigeria.
Dr. Adeleke, we run out of time. I want to thank you for joining and sharing your insights with us on primary care today. You do some wonderful work.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is Dr. Brian McDonough. If you missed any of this discussion, please visit reachmd.com/primary care today. Download the podcast. You can learn more about the series. Thanks again for listening.